Welcome to the Low Tox Life podcast.
Classic myth that I think always surprises people is like everyone thinks spinach is a good source of calcium. And I do like to dispel that one because it's really not. And it's just has really just poor bioavailability. I think it's good for other reasons. It has other antioxidants, vitamins, fiber, minerals, but it's not that you shouldn't eat spinach, it's just that you shouldn't consider it your source of calcium.
Welcome to the podcast. I'm Alex Stewart, your host. Today I have Dr. Jocelyn Wittstein, an incredibly clever woman, joining me on the show to discuss musculoskeletal health and the musculoskeletal syndrome of menopause. Jocelyn takes us through so many practical tips when it comes to what we can do for both preventative and with a view to fixing all sorts of musculoskeletal issues. We discuss things like osteoporosis, arthritis and the different types, and how hormones fluctuating in women tend to predispose us at different times in our cycles, if we're still cycling, to injury. Jocelyn is a professor, a surgeon. She's also at the forefront of the research. So we're very lucky to have her here as she takes us all through it. And you can't help but feel empowered by the way she makes everything so approachable and doable. I'm going to head to a quick message from our partners who help us put this show on and of course give you your low tox swaps. And then we'll jump straight in. All of October, you have 15% off at Block Blue Light, and this is an international offer. Your code is LowToxLife, and you can head to blockbluelight.com. They help you keep blue light out of your evenings, keep you from experiencing computer blue light strain during the day, and have a bunch of lighting options, mask options for sleeping to keep that light junk out overnight and allow you to get deep rest, as well as super high quality red light panels, which the research shows us helps for tissue, joint, muscle, bone repair through to mitochondrial support, energy, inflammation, and even hair stimulation and skin support for things like eczema, acne, psoriasis, dermatitis, also rosacea. Enjoy that 15% off with code LowToxLife for October. It's an international offer. Let's head to the show. Jocelyn, hi. I'm so thrilled to have you on the show.
Hi, thank you for having me. I'm so happy to be connecting to people in Australia. It's really fun.
I know, it's amazing how technology brings us all together, and I started following your work a little while back and then plunged into all the research papers you've either authored, co-authored, been a cohort of scientists on, and wow, I thought I've just got to have you on the show because a lot of the questions we get are about like, hold on, why is my body breaking? Like all over, all at once. And you know a fair bit about that.
I try to take science and make it digestible for people, but
yeah, well, I think that's the beauty of social media, right? Yeah. You can get into all the nitty gritty as someone on the front lines working in both research and practice. And then there's the ordinary person who goes, yeah, that's great to know that that has been confirmed, but what does that mean I have to do? But, you know, that's... Yeah, exactly. Now, I know we're not going to speak exclusively about your wonderful book coming out because I think the book really speaks for itself. I've read it. It is so comprehensive, easy, and hopeful, I felt when I was reading it as a midlifer.
Glad you feel that way because those are all the things we wanted people to feel when they...
Yeah, and I noticed it's not just you that wrote the book, but you have a wonderful co-author and you guys have a gorgeous backstory. Can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, my lifelong friend, Zanina Skorsky, we were both gymnasts together for years. And then we both went to college and she went to Brown University and was a gymnast there. And I went to Cornell University and I was a gymnast there. And we both studied nutritional science. And then she became a registered dietitian and a personal trainer. She did some additional training, got her master's at Columbia. She now works with collegiate athletes and such. But and then I went to medical school and did my orthopedic residency and fellowship at Duke University and became an orthopedic surgeon. But we've always had this sort of common interest in nutrition, which of course, and exercise. And I, really think that nutrition and exercise are the most important base for our bone and joint health. We can do surgery, we can use medications, we can use physical therapy, but those are all oftentimes, reacting to the problem, not being proactive. And so it was so fun to work together. I approached Sydney after I had kind of started this project and asked her to collaborate with me. And for so many months, we would just Zoom together on Sundays and buckle down and work on this. And it was just fun.
And you're both so complementary of each other with the
Mm-hmm.
studies you then went on to do. And I think we need so much more of that in science because like that's when we get the really good stuff floating to the top, when lots of
Oh,
minds
yeah.
come together from
I
their
learned from her
perspectives.
and she learns from me. Yeah, it's great.
Yeah. And so let's dive into why we need to be protecting our bones and joints and tissues around the body. I remember being about 46, so that's nearly 4 years ago, and everything just seemed to go wrong all at once. It happened to coincide with getting a hunting breed of a dog who's 40 kilos. So, yes, he is partially guilty for my fall that caused my fracture. And then I got a torn tendon. And then I couldn't lift my arm one day.
Right, one
And
thing
I
after
was just like, what is going on? And of course, that's the fateful day that you wonder whether it's linked to hormones. Google, how long does perimenopause last? And get that beautiful 4 to 10 year search
another.
result. And you're like, what can I do? That really was a bit of a turning point for me. I know it is for many women, but could we hopefully, with your book and all the resources starting to be created this year and last, I think there's a real explosion,
Mm-hmm.
get to a more preventative, here's what's coming and here's how we can minimize risk, right?
Oh, I absolutely think so. I think the narrative is changing faster with osteoporosis than it is with arthritis, but in terms of it being more of a preventable condition, because it's something where we lose bone density over time and certainly at an accelerated rate at menopause. But I think it's always been thought of as like an inevitable thing or something where you can't, change it. And aside from utilizing hormone therapy, there's a lot of data, and it's not even new data, like a lot of it is old, but
Mm.
just being kind of more broadly exposed or brought to light or brought to the general public about the benefits of strength training and impact exercises and how diet can impact your bone health and lifestyle choices. For years we thought of osteoporosis as being something that you eventually get and then you need medication for it, and I think now people are just being so much more proactive, which is good.
Can you talk us through these degradations that happen to the final point of osteoporosis and
Mhm.
whether these things are reversible, preventable? Like what, I mean, obviously preventable, we're going to be unpacking a whole bunch of stuff. But what if someone's actually in these conversations right now? You have osteopenia and we recommend this, and you have osteoporosis and now you've got to go on this. Some empowerment
Yeah.
vocab?
So, I mean, just numbers wise, these are
Mm,
like specific cutoffs on a DEXA scan. So,
yeah,
like osteopenia, so osteoporosis means your T score in your DEXA is worse than negative 2.5. But you could be in the range of, -1 to negative 2.5, and you're osteopenic, which means it's not, as severe as osteoporosis. Now, you could also be someone who has osteopenia, but you've already had a fragility fracture. Like you could have osteopenia, but have fallen and broken your hip. That kind of puts you in a different class than someone who's, just has some mild osteopenia, but you've never had a fracture, right? And there are
right.
ways to assess future fracture risk. Like anyone can go online and calculate their frac score as long as they have enough knowledge to put in the data points, and you can see what your future fracture risk is,
Hmm.
and then those are things used in decision making, right? But there's a lot of literature on people with osteopenia and being able to gain bone mineral density through things like impact exercises and strength training. um, in the osteoporosis range, there's more literature on the treatment, because so
Mm.
often the studies are on treating those patients like, well, you already have the condition or you're already high risk for fracture, and it's often like looking at medications to create an increase in bone mineral density, which may tip someone out of osteoporosis back into the osteopenic range. There's not as much information clearly available about exercise interventions for us people with osteoporosis, because a lot of it is largely done on people with osteopenia, where it's like we can say, well, this is safe and there were no injuries and nothing occurred. And so I think, we see more of the data on exercise-based interventions really in osteopenic patients. And it may be that there's less of a response in patients with osteoporosis, but I think a lot of times we need modifications for people with osteoporosis as
Got
well.
it.
So I
And
think it's
so,
never too late to work on it and
yeah,
and do the things that we know improve. But there's really a lot of risk assessment, and like for an individual, it's such an individual thing looking at their history. It's hard to
mm,
make a blanket statement about that.
yeah, for sure. I totally agree. And we never shame people about medication. Like, if
Yeah.
that is going to be the thing that is the safest thing to get you out of the danger zone right now while you work on a long game, would
Hmm.
you say then there's an important and healthy trade-off to consider there if someone's usually against taking things and, because
Right.
there's a lot of people worry about side effects and
Yes. I think that there is definitely, we always have risk benefit discussions in medicine, of course, and everything should be a shared decision making. And people are really terrified of some of the side effects of these medications, like, mandibular osteonecrosis, for example, which is very, very rare. And the reductions in fracture risk are very, very large. And your life can be severely impacted by like a hip fracture, for instance. Like you may
mm,
become dependent on an assistive device or assistance of others, and statistics which sound very scary, death after a hip fracture ranging from depending on the study you read, 15% at 1 year, maybe a third at 2 years. But more just like I think the lack of independence and the complications that can happen from having a hip fracture, for instance. I know people are afraid of the medications, but they do have significant benefits to offer in terms of preventing these,
yeah.
bad things. So,
Yeah, I think we can hang our hat on too small a number often
hmm
in like layperson trying to understand science,
hmm
and so you see that like 1 in 1,000 have a risk on a particular side effect, and
hmm
that's what you're terrified of instead of being terrified of the hip fracture. And what
right,
that, you know what I mean? Which is actually a much bigger percentage if you're doing a risk benefit analysis
hmm
logically.
right. It's hard to be logical when one thing sounds
Mm.
really
And
scary.
so, given you would have obviously prescribed these to patients over the years, Jocelyn, can I ask what people can do who are scared of side effects, but this seems to be the best option for them in a current osteoporosis picture? How to monitor effectively for and know to stop early, so that someone can feel a bit more empowered if they decide to move forward. Because I think a sense of something being safe and working is
hmm
almost just as important as taking the thing to make it work.
Right. Yeah. Follow-up studies and seeing
Mm.
improvement are certainly helpful, positive feedback. Interestingly, in the United States, orthopedic surgeons don't really prescribe medications for osteoporosis, like
Right.
bisphosphonates are generally prescribed by sometimes our women health partners and colleagues, oftentimes by endocrinologists. And like the serial imaging and the serial DEXA scans, I think are really helpful for like seeing improvement. They're also helpful, like if you're in an osteopenic state and you're doing all these things to try to like right the ship and slow down bone loss or gain bone loss. It can be very motivating to see what
Yeah.
your score is, to see kind of what sort of improvements you're getting. And in general, if you look at interventions, a lot of studies on medications will show like what improvement you see over like 3 years, for instance. But a lot of the exercise-based interventions, you can see improvements of a few percentage points in less than a year.
Wow.
Um, Now, again, they're usually on people with osteopenia. These studies are not typically on people with osteoporosis, but you could see an improvement as in, short of a time span as a year.
Amazing. So then obviously there are supplements, there are food interventions, There's hormone therapy that can support. Can we talk through each of those briefly, starting
Hmm.
with supplements when
Hmm.
it comes to the osteopenia porosis picture? Our major partner, OzClimate, is an Australian offer and they give you 10% off with the code LowToxLife all year round. A question I get asked often is, do I need a dehumidifier, an air filter, or both? And the thing to remember is an air purification helps reduce the toxic burden of your indoor air across all types of things, from pollens, dust mite, mold, VOCs from building materials. It reduces the level of toxins in your indoor air. Dehumidification reduces the moisture in your indoor air, helping you prevent the growth of mold and the contamination of your soft furnishings, clothes, and of course yourself. Because when it's over 60% humidity, mold is then given the perfect environment to grow. All it needs is dust particles or any kind of soft furnishing that it can grab onto, and it will literally start its job of multiplying and decomposing things. So dehumidification is for moisture control, reduction, and of course, therefore, the prevention of the growth of mold in your indoor environment. And air purification is for the overall reduction of toxic burden of a multitude of things for your indoor air. So hopefully that helps answer that question. A big thank you to OzClimate for being our partner, and let's get into the show.
Hmm. Yeah. I think that supplements, one way to think of them is for preventing a deficiency. I actually like to utilize a level of vitamin D supplementation that is higher than what is our necessary amount, but that's actually more of a potential benefit for things like dementia prevention. Actually, joint pain, related to knee arthritis can be helped by a higher dose of vitamin D, like something in the range of 2 to 4,000 units a day. But in general, like supplementation, like vitamin D, can be important if you're like someone who's low, if you're chronically low in your vitamin D, because obviously vitamin D is an important nutrient for bone density. Likewise, calcium, if you don't get an adequate amount of calcium through your diet, if you're a menopausal woman and you're not getting 1,200 milligrams per day, then adding a supplement is important so that you're not deficient, because obviously calcium deficiency can contribute to worse bone density over time. Magnesium is something that I think a lot of people have a hard time getting enough of in their diet. I take 400 milligrams of magnesium glycinate a day, and it has other benefits as well. It can help with sleep and things like that. Now, in terms of collagen supplements, I do think there's reasonable data looking at hydrolyzed type 1 collagen as a supplement that can improve bone density, with data based on menopausal women who already had some osteopenia, showing some improvement over time. The type that was studied and sort of a shorter term and then a 4-year term follow up was a brand called Fortabone, but
Mm-hmm.
it's a type 1 hydrolyzed collagen. The main type of collagen in bone is type 1.
Yeah.
And so, I think those are all reasonable things to think about in terms of supplements, for sure.
For sure.
Creatine monohydrate, I don't think it directly, increases your bone mineral density, but can help with increasing lean muscle mass if you're combining it with strength training. And we know that maintenance of lean muscle mass is certainly associated with better bone density. So I take 5 grams of creatine monohydrate a day.
Every
That's
single day.
the
Yeah.
supplement topic.
That is the supplement topic.
Yeah.
Okay. Food topic. Oh, actually, before we move on, if I think of what cardiologists have said to me over the years in the show, just a footnote there on the vitamin D, calcium, and vitamin K2
Hmm.
coming in, so the calcium actually gets to the bones.
Hmm.
K2 can be a great driver. Even if I think I remember interviewing the amazing pioneer Stephen Sinatra before he passed, and he talked about even just a couple of times a week. It'll just make sure that if you are taking those sorts of supplements, it gets the calcium to where you actually want it to go instead of your arteries. And I thought that was like, okay, I've always remembered that.
Yeah, I mean, I tried in the most basic sense. Obviously, like we need calcium, we need to absorb calcium. Vitamin
Mm,
D helps us absorb calcium. Magnesium helps vitamin D help us absorb calcium. And once we absorb calcium, vitamin K basically helps with activating something called osteocalcin, and that can help with mineralization of bone. And so you'll
Mm,
often see it with like higher dose vitamin D supplements. It does include vitamin K.
exactly.
Your daily value of vitamin K is about 100 micrograms per day. Most
Mm.
people will get, if you're eating a varied diet, you're gonna often get that. But
Yeah, which feeds perfectly into eating whole foods and variety, right?
right. Mhm.
Yeah.
But I
Mm.
think, yeah, if you're taking like a higher dose, like not just like 600 or 800 units a day, if you're doing like the 2 or the 4,000, it makes sense to take it
Yeah.
with the vitamin K. Mhm.
Thank you for letting me sort of tangent there. So
Mhm.
let's talk foods. What are some of your favorite bone building foods?
I love this topic because there's a lot of myths about where you can get calcium in your diet,
Mm.
and the classic myth that I think always surprises people is like everyone thinks spinach is a good source of calcium. And
Hmm.
I do like to dispel that one because it's really not. And it's just has really, really just poor bioavailability. I think it's good for other reasons. Has other antioxidants, vitamins, fiber, minerals, but it's not that you shouldn't eat spinach. It's just that you shouldn't consider it your source of calcium.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah. Like don't go the piles of spinach thinking I'm doing a good
You're
job for
getting
my
tons of
bones.
calcium.
Yeah, yeah.
And, likewise, like almonds have some calcium in them, but you would have to eat so many almonds. Like
Mm.
you would exceed the number of calories you should eat a
Yeah,
day
yeah.
if you're eating a ton of almonds. Um, but, I do, so dairy is certainly a highly bioavailable source of calcium. There are people who don't tolerate dairy and can't
Mm.
get calcium that way or have bad reactions to dairy. And so the other kind of broad category of food that provides us calcium is cruciferous vegetables in general have high bioavailability. And then like the one, my favorite dietary source of calcium is bok choy because it has not only high bioavailability, but also actually a high just amount of calcium in it. So that's like kind of one of my favorite just
Yeah, I
pearls.
was surprised to see how high up on your chart that was. I was like,
Yeah, like
oh,
as a
it seems so
superfood.
watery and fresh and mild as a food, but yeah.
I know. So it's kind of like one of my superfoods that I like always buy when I go to the grocery
Mm.
store. I love the smaller bok choys.
Yeah, we love them
Um,
too.
yeah, and then there's a couple of things we don't think about much. We don't think about chia seeds or basil seeds, even more so, having a lot of fiber and calcium. And then there are like some things like I just personally can't eat, like sardines with the little bones, have a lot of calcium. I just can't make myself eat it. Salmon for
Fair
me is
enough.
gross.
Can
Yeah,
I
I
give,
just
just in case someone's listening and wants to be inspired by them, but is now thinking, oh no, she doesn't like them, so I'm not going to like them either.
oh no, like lots
I
of
do
people have good
agree.
ideas about how they're good.
Yeah,
I'm
I do.
admitting it's a personal weakness. Yeah.
It's yeah, yeah, totally. You could do we often do wild Alaskan tinned salmon, so it's nice and cheap. They leave the bones in, so there's
Exactly. That's
tons
another
of
good
calcium
source.
in there, and you can make really yummy fish cakes with
Yeah.
lentils and herbs,
Hmm.
and that's a great way. But sardines, I find you need a ton of acidity, so lots of fresh lemon, tomatoes, onion for a bit of like a heat to it, and that we love. Mm.
But the salmon with the bones, like that's a great idea because it has calcium, it has vitamin D, you're getting omega 3s. So that's an excellent food. Then we think about foods with vitamin D. A lot of dairy is supplemented with vitamin D. Salmon is a great source of vitamin D. Eggs have some vitamin D. Mushrooms have some vitamin D. A lot of people don't know that. And then fiber is very important for both bone and joint health. It's anti-inflammatory. There's a lot of data about short chain fatty acids that our gut microbiome essentially generates for us in diets with fiber. And those contribute to anti-inflammatory pathways, which are important to kind of modulate, that they both
Mm.
of those there are commonalities between arthritis and osteoporosis related to some of these inflammatory pathways, inflammatory cytokines. So, and of course there are like all kinds of micronutrients that are, important too. Forever.
Yeah, I know you feature a lot of spices and Indian
Mm.
cuisine and things like that in the book, which that just makes everything tasty as well.
Yes, that's more for an anti-inflammatory effect. Yeah.
And so, speaking of anti-inflammatory, can we pivot now into arthritis? Because there are different types. And again, there's the like wait and see kind of phases where people are just kind of left going, what, I've got to wait till it gets
So
really
this to get
bad
really
and then
bad,
we
yeah.
do something. What is that we do? Medication or surgery? And
Mm-hmm.
so before then, and with different types, I'm sure some of the things we're talking about are helpful here as well.
Oh yeah. There are so many people that I tell them, I'm like, you're a tweener, you're like in between. There's so many people have like a little bit of, age related change. And like, let's just say knee, for example, for
Mm,
people to be able to think about this. Like their cartilage starts to get a little thinner. Their joints respond a little worse to loads they used to tolerate. Like they might go for a run and get a little swelling, or I don't know if you have pickleball where you are, but it's very common here, and people go play pickleball and then their knees swell.
mm,
And they're like, I didn't even do anything. Like, I've never hurt myself. I'm like, I know, your knee is just getting a little older. You get an x-ray or get an MRI. There's like not an acute injury. It's just that their cartilage is a little bit less thick. It doesn't tolerate load as well. And so they're not going to benefit from a knee arthroscopy, but they also don't need a knee replacement. And they're in this like in between state where, like, what do? You're in the land of symptom management,
yeah.
basically.
Yeah. Well, and people don't often get given much to do in that phase.
Yeah. And that's frustrating to just be like unempowered with your
Mm,
diagnosis.
yeah.
And so I try to tell people all the things that they could possibly do that could benefit them. And some of them are exercise and diet related, and some of them are supplements. And there's, I think, too many supplements marketed, but we can talk about some. But, in terms of, yeah, I think an anti-inflammatory diet can be helpful. We talked about vitamin D supplementation in like a higher range has been shown to reduce joint pain. There is also evidence that I think is pretty reasonable for, again, hydrolyzed collagen. We talked about the
Mm,
hydrolyzed type 1 collagen, but most of these supplements do have a mixture of collagen types. If you look at like the basic science where they study hydrolyzed type 2 collagen, which is the type that's in articular cartilage, I think there's reasonable evidence that this can contribute to symptom reduction. So I do feel okay about recommending that. I use a collagen supplement that has a mixture of the different collagen types.
mm,
There's some reasonable data, like well done studies looking at using curcumin, which is part of turmeric, as an anti-inflammatory. I don't think people can go on taking like NSAIDs every day, multiple times a day forever. That will eventually
yeah.
cause a problem. You can use them intermittently. Curcumin has been shown to help people not need NSAIDs if they take a supplement, ranging from 1,000 to 1,500 milligrams a day, something like that.
Yeah.
Um, there are always over-the-counter medications. There are different injection types. We don't like to overuse steroids. There's a whole slew of different biologic type injections and lubricating injections.
There are.
Um,
And so for
yeah.
arthritis, do things like PRP, I had PRP on a torn tendon
Hmm.
and it was miraculous. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm actually healed after months and months of spending hundreds of dollars on physio and finally got the MRI and there was actually a tear. So I actually needed intervention and PRP was miraculous. But arthritis is different to a tear. So,
Right. Well, PRP is, I think, lateral epicondylitis or tendon elbow, whatever you want to call it, is one of the best uses of PRP. It really does help people, and it has
mm,
pretty much replaced surgery for that problem for me. I almost never do surgery on that condition anymore.
on tendon
No.
issues.
The tendon at the elbow, yeah.
Mm,
And that's an area you really do not want to use steroid. But
yeah.
in terms of knee arthritis, I also think there's reasonable evidence to support. There's a type of PRP where you remove some of the white cells. It's called low white cell autologous conditioned plasma. So it's
Wow.
a type of PRP, which
Mm,
is, for people who don't know, who are listening, platelet rich plasma, or PRP, is where you draw off some blood, usually about 50 cc's or so, and you spin it down to 3 or 4 cc's or milliliters, whichever version you want to use, of this sort of anti-inflammatory serum. And it can be injected into a joint,
mm,
but usually in joints we'll kind of modify it a little bit.
yeah.
And there's evidence that that helps with certainly symptom reduction. There's not any evidence that like any of there are other versions of biologic injections, like you can have a bone marrow aspirate, for instance, when people are like looking to have like stem cell injections in their knees. And there's not, I would say, overwhelming evidence to suggest that that's better than doing that version of PRP, and it's certainly less expensive and less invasive to do that version of the PRP. But it's not going to, again, reverse arthritis or get rid of it. It's more symptom management. But for people who are like, you could have a steroid injection if it only helps you for a couple months. Doesn't make sure to, it doesn't make sense to repeat it. So you might try some of these other things like the PRP, or about half of people will see some benefit from like what people call a gel shot, which is like a visco supplementation is called. It's more of like this sort of they come from things like rooster comb, for example, but
Right.
they're like a lubricating type of shot that can have some anti-inflammatory effect in the joint. It doesn't work for everyone, so I usually, if like I have a new patient who comes to me and they have new onset joint pain and swelling, it's never happened to them before. First of all, I'll drain their knee to get the swelling out, and I'll try a steroid like one time. If they don't get like really long-lasting benefits, I don't want them to get on that path of
On a
repeated.
merry-go-round. Yeah.
Yeah. And so we may try the PRP, we may try the visco supplementation, again, in the category of reducing symptoms. And then the other, broad categories, how do you live your life with arthritis, is some of it is activity modification. And like I or a physical therapist can help people with that. It may be, you have to modulate load. Like you may not be able to run every day, but maybe you can with the day of rest in between, or maybe a shorter duration. Or maybe you change the surface you're running on, or maybe you become more of a cross trainer. Maybe you start rowing, to have less stress on your knees, but still get like an intense cardiovascular exercise. You start, it's helpful to do strength training. We get this, you get loss of muscle mass sometimes in the quadriceps. It's called quadriceps avoidance, where people don't do things that build muscle because their knee is hurting, and they need to work around that and find ways to maintain their muscle
Yeah,
mass.
and people start forward bending for picking
Yeah,
things up
and
instead of
so
squatting.
there's a lot of like avoiding things that might otherwise have, like finding ways to work around, stay active, maintain your cardiovascular fitness, maintain your strength, which takes some load off of your knee. And then, yeah, minimizing the symptoms so you can stay mobile. And you may someday need a replacement. Like we're very intentional in the book. We're not promising people like there's not like a magical way to reverse arthritis.
Yeah. Yeah.
But you can figure out how to live with it and strength train and maintain your cardiovascular fitness around it. And it's really important to do that.
Absolutely. And there are some really interesting dietary changes that you can make. A lot of people find, I know Dr. Stephen Gundry's done some great work around seeds and how they can be inflammatory for some people with arthritis. And my own mother-in-law said, I cannot eat tomatoes. I can feel it straight away. She really noticed it. And I just thought, God, this is really about tuning in as well to certain meals where you think, God, I'm extra achy after that. What was that? And is it the same next time?
Yeah, I think every person is different. Even there are people who don't have a true gluten allergy, but they may be gluten sensitive, and people need to listen to themselves and pay attention to what they're eating. And I also think that people don't realize, really, if you really look at what you're eating, a lot of people are just eating really processed things and don't even realize they are. It's easier to maybe gauge what you respond better to if you know all of the ingredients that you're eating.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or there's less of them. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. Can I ask about, because I went through that PRP journey and I think it was 3 injections, 1 a month. But of course, then you've got to see your sports medicine doctor, and the PRP injections were not covered by anything. It was literally every spare dollar I had for those 3 months went onto. My love of tennis was gratefully powerful enough that I was like, I will eat tuna on toast for lunch every day if I have to, save the cash, get this elbow sorted, and I got it done. But that is, like, it's a very privileged dollar cost to be able to explore a lot of the options that help.
Definitely. And also, there are huge variations in how much is charged for that.
Yeah.
I will tell you, I mean, even I see where I am like on the order of like 4 times as much at one place as the other. And there is some cost to it for, there's equipment
Yeah.
and all that. But like I'm sometimes astounded at how much or being charged
Yeah.
for that.
Get yourself a couple of opinions before you decide. Yeah.
Yeah, and also that is one reason why we'll sometimes try like a steroid injection and then maybe the visco supplementation before like telling someone. I always tell them, I was like, there is reasonable evidence for this, but it's like not covered by insurance, which is frustrating.
Mm.
And I didn't actually know what it was, how that worked in Australia, but especially for like lateral epicondylitis, we really should not be injecting steroid there, but that is covered by insurance. Whereas the
Exactly. So it
PRP is
ends
not.
up being the thing that people
And
choose
I
because
like
yeah.
for the tendon strain at the elbow, lateral epicondylitis, there are people who are like begging me for steroid injection. I tell them this is one and done because that is an area you can cause muscle atrophy and you can cause an iatrogenic problem, like a problem made worse. Like you should
Mm.
never have more than one steroid injection for tennis elbow. It's just it can cause a worse problem. So it's frustrating that something that has, I feel like, pretty good efficacy for a lot of people isn't covered by insurance, but something that we're saying like I really would rather you not have this is covered by insurance.
Mm. And how, because people get so frustrated, and this is why people take matters into their own hands with content online, and then we can end up with a proliferating kind of truthy sense of science that isn't actually helping us move things forward inside the system. As an orthopedic surgeon, how do you see any kind of hope and ability to change things like that, where it's obvious there's something better than another thing, but it's not covered? Is there any hope of changing that?
I mean, I think helping people with their health literacy and hopefully giving people,
Mm.
real information. I think that insurance companies often do eventually cover things when enough literature adds up to it.
Yeah. And I often
Yeah.
think this is where we forget the power of the local member of government, and having a much more localized conversation about things that are affecting you in your daily life. Because if I think of me with a lifelong, let's just say, tendon problem because I couldn't have afforded the PRP, then I stopped playing my favorite sport. So there's a mental health risk that creeps
Mm-hmm.
in because of the well-being of being able to do that,
Mm-hmm.
and losing the community that you have with community sport. Then I can't lift things up. So I need help, or I need NSAIDs, and then they start destroying my gut health, and then I end up with other problems because of that. And you end up costing a heck ton more
Mm-hmm.
in being weak as a
Yeah,
human.
or surgery is more expensive
Or
than
surgery is more expensive.
that, or more time.
Exactly.
So,
Yeah.
mhm.
Exactly. So I just think sometimes, we spend so much time on screens. Like, could we give a tenth of that time to local member communication about
Mhm.
issues that you're facing every day? Because if like 100 other people are facing that issue, then they're starting to say, well, why isn't this covered by insurance? Yeah, I want a, parliamentary inquiry, or a,
Mhm.
Congress inquiry. I think there's enough like circular whinging. We need to
Yes,
start
yes.
whinging up a little bit more. So I just wanted to share that because I've been thinking about it a lot. And, I hear about all these incredible treatments through this podcast. And I just think, yeah, but it's a privilege right now. Yeah. And it's off insurance. And it's only if you've got the couple of grand to see it through.
Right.
Right. So
Yeah,
that's,
very
I
frustrating.
just had to share that, because if it wakes a couple of people up to do something more, then great.
Yes.
Okay, so the
That's
third,
also the importance of research,
yeah, that's it. And funding
continuing
great
to do research.
research.
Yeah. Hmm.
Mm. And research into women's health.
Yes.
Yeah. So let's
Mhm.
talk about women in midlife very specifically then, because it does feel like there's a bit of a tax on us
Mhm.
medically as we lose estrogen and these musculoskeletal things creep up. And you and Vonda Wright and a couple of others wrote that seminal paper, published it, I think it was last year. I can't remember when
Mhm.
it came out, maybe the year before. It was incredible. So thank you for doing that. Were you always interested, or as a surgeon and, you start just seeing, hold on, Everyone's in their 40s and 50s here. What is going on?
Mhm.
Like, when did a light come on for you?
Well, like I was always interested in, actually a sports medicine surgeon by subspecialty training, and
Huh.
I've always had an interest in treating female athletes really across the
Mm.
lifespan. So that includes like adolescence and collegiate and pre and postmenopausal master's athletes. And I think early on, I thought more about the effects of things like estradiol and sex hormones on, like, I like to think of things in disparities, right?
Mm.
Like women, female athletes are 8 times more likely to tear their ACL than male. And there are a lot of
Yeah.
theories as to why, and we struggle to figure that out. And some of it is probably hormonal, and we're actually currently working on a way to like study that better. Of course, there's a condition that women also experience far more than men, which is breast cancer. I started to realize that I had a lot of breast cancer patients on aromatase inhibitors that were experiencing a lot of frozen shoulder.
Mm.
And I started to notice also early on in my practice that frozen shoulder, what we know as a condition, which was labeled as idiopathic for many, many years, basically something that primarily affects women between the age of 40 and 60. You just, you see these continuous themes in your practice. And I sort of started to put together in my head about these younger women on aromatase inhibitors and the women midlife experiencing frozen shoulder.
Mm.
And just thinking about disparities, first of all, in athletes over time, but then just sort of different conditions in my practice. And I started thinking the frozen shoulder was really like the gateway for me to start to think about the musculoskeletal impacts of menopause and understanding that estradiol is an anti-inflammatory and sort of a lot of the basic science behind that. I started to look into frozen shoulder first and just seeing the impact that anecdotally, but also sort of as I dug into data that menopausal hormone therapy can have on frozen shoulder. And then again, when you just think about disparities, like women have so much more osteoporosis than men, women are more prone to arthritis than men. And there's a commonality, these things start to dramatically increase over the age of 50, which is, depending
Mm.
on the source where you read, the average age of menopause is 51 or 52. These aren't coincidental. Women also have more rheumatoid arthritis, which is, of course, a very inflammatory state. Um, all of this stuff happening at the same time, these disparities, like there's a reason behind that. And so, again, I think the frozen shoulder was like the gateway for me, but I've always
Yeah.
kind of thought about disparities in orthopedic conditions between men and women. And
Mm.
the ones that are top of the list are ACL tears, frozen shoulder, arthritis, osteoporosis. And I guess that's how I kind of came to understand this.
Yeah. I follow tennis very closely as a big fan of that sport. And I often think, people are so hard on the inconsistency in the women's draw, or, what, like there's just these ridiculous things that are said about women in sport, or wow, she bombed out in that race. You see it on track and
Mm-hmm.
field. And uh, a shadow of her former self, but it might actually just be 2 days before her period, and I often
Yeah,
just think of
right.
how
It's
I
right,
feel.
low estrogen
Yeah,
states.
yeah.
Of course, estrogen fluctuates in low estrogen states. So estrogen, there are estrogen receptors in skeletal muscle. It can affect muscle endurance, and mitochondrial function. So yeah, there are likely, when estrogen is lower, you may have um, more issues with sort of muscular fatigue and endurance. And then the flip
Mm.
side of the conversation is, when estrogen is higher, is there more ligamentous laxity? And that gets into these debates we have about like when are people more at risk for ACL injury. Um, and so like one of the studies I'm working on right now is looking at like real time, um, like same day levels of
Mm.
hormones in women and looking at how their ACL functions with some landing activities. And we have probably a more complex way of looking at that you want to hear about, but
No, no, we are nerdy. Please share. Go for
like
it.
making models of knees that we can overlay on actual like real-time movements with x-ray images in multiple planes, and then looking at hormone levels like at the same time, and actually looking at the effects of female sex hormones on the strain and the laxity on the ACL, which is of
Mm.
course the most commonly injured ligament in the knee. So that's an area that needs more study, but it's certainly there are hormonal fluctuations that can affect athletes.
And so, is it still $1 million question to be able to ask, when should I back off high intensity load impact exercise from a risk of injury perspective?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think anytime you're exercising, you need to pay attention to how you're feeling. There are days that I
Mm,
go to lift weights and I just don't feel as strong, or I don't feel as bouncy.
yeah.
And I might modify, or I feel more easily fatigued, and I'm fine with listening to myself and changing my plan for the day and modifying. But in terms of like ligament injury, yeah, I think we still don't know because of this. I think there's this intersection of muscle fatigue and endurance, but also ligamentous laxity that we're still figuring out.
Okay.
I'm
And
hoping to answer that $1 million question
yeah,
with the
yeah,
study
maybe
that,
$1 million more in funding might be helpful
well,
there.
it's crazy how much money this stuff costs. I mean,
Mm,
I collaborate with a couple of PhDs, Dr. DeFreight and Dr. McNulty, and graduate students. It's so much work and so much collaboration and teamwork. And yeah, these things, like a study like that, will cost a few $1 million, really. But I'm
yeah.
hoping we really get to the bottom of that specific issue because it's never really been studied in that.
And then if we think about preventative support, it's all the things we've talked about already, right? Even for osteo and arthritis, the food, the supplements, the exercise all help to support the musculoskeletal system and reduce injury risk generally.
Yeah, yeah, and
Yeah.
adequate fueling.
Mm.
One of the things that people who are very active, especially younger people who are like, let's say you're kind of still accruing your bone mineral density, like you're not even 30 yet, you're still accruing bone mass. You know, more isn't necessarily always better, or the concept of being underfueled or relative energy deficiency in
Mm.
sport can be an issue. So active is good. Strength training is good. Doing high impact things when you're younger is good for, accruing bone density and bone quality. But if you're not adequately fueled, and you get into like a chronic, significant energy deficiency, you can, lose your menstrual cycles.
Mm.
You're not ovulating. You basically get into this, low estrogen state, and people can develop significant loss of bone density as a young person and arrive at age 30 with a lower peak bone mass than they should have. That wasn't exactly what you're asking me about, but it is something to
No, I think it's
acknowledge.
important to, yeah, absolutely, 100%. And in terms of fuel, electrolytes would be important there as well.
Yeah, people are, I don't know. I think people got a little over the top with electrolytes
I
lately.
agree.
I've got
I
like a
had a question
sample.
in my notes saying like,
Yeah.
does the regular kind of twice a week strength trainer who tries to get their steps up every day and maybe throws in a Norwegian 4x4 here or there, like a me type person, do we really need to be having sodium at 1,000 milligrams in a liter?
Yeah, I
That for
personally
me feels
don't.
like it's an Olympian athlete kind of level of sodium.
Well, and it depends on how much you're sweating and losing. But
Mm.
I'm like you. I like to do a Norwegian 4x4 once a week. I like to get about 150 minutes a week of cardiovascular exercise in. I like to strength train a couple days a week. I like to do like some jumping and agility work.
Mm.
Um, I don't ever think about taking an electrolyte supplement ever. Like I don't.
Wow. Okay.
I
So mostly clever marketing, you think?
I mean, I eat real food and I drink
Mm.
water. I'm
Yeah.
not. Maybe if I were, running, doing more than if I were doing, over 90 minutes of cardiovascular exercise or something, or endurance training, like that could be reasonable. But um, I got a packet of something the other day that just came in I don't even remember what it was. It was just a little,
Some kind of promo, something. Yeah.
yeah. And I
Mm.
was like, oh, this has like some watermelon flavor or something. That sounds good. I'll put it in my water. And it had 1,200 milligrams of sodium in it.
Mm.
I just thought, why would I'm trying to, I don't want this much sodium. I don't want to exceed my daily limit by the end of the day.
Yeah. So does sodium excess have an impact on bone health or joint health?
Yeah,
Do we
like I
know?
think, yeah, chronically taking in too much salt isn't good.
Mm.
Um, yeah, I think most people eat too much salt. I think the average person does not need to add salt to their water.
Yeah. The only time I feel like I really benefit from electrolytes is the crazy, humid, schwitzing kind of level of day that we have
Right, if
as
you're
a coastal
exercising
city.
in
Yeah, yeah.
heat and you're, yeah,
Mm.
having an excessive amount of sweating. Yeah, I
And
think,
when I was very unwell with mold illness and I had cellular hydration issues, I was just this big
mm-hmm,
puffball and it wasn't. So, a really good comprehensive electrolyte where there's balance of potassium, magnesium, carbonate,
mm-hmm.
all the good things. But the super high sodium ones, I'm so glad it came up because it kind of was a bit of a red flag for me.
Yeah, yeah, I think most people don't need that much sodium.
I founded Low Tox Life in 2009, and as the community grew, I started to identify areas that people needed structured learning. And that is when the first e-course, Go Low Tox, was born in 2014. Since then, I've worked with scientists and health professionals to bring you low-cost courses to help you shortcut your goals with whatever you're challenged by right now. So whether you're new to going low tox and you'd love a framework and some really helpful suggestions across 22 different topics covering everyday life, or maybe you're working on an inflammation picture and you just want some help to calm the farm, whether you're on a fertility journey, either having trouble or wanting to optimize, we literally have courses for these and more. Head to lowtoxlife.com, hit the course tab, and enjoy. Mm-mm. Okay, and so I have a couple more areas I want to explore. Let's do surgery and imaging.
So, for instance, like with the condition you're describing, lateral epicondylitis, which is very common, the MRI is kind of inconsistent. There are people who have
Hmm.
severe lateral epicondylitis that can have a very normal MRI. There are people who have mild lateral epicondylitis that can have a very abnormal MRI. So the thing about
Wow,
your condition
interesting.
is that the findings on the MRI don't actually match the severity of the condition. And so for that particular condition, we actually don't rely on MRI very much. I will
Hmm.
get it if I've gotten to the point where I'm like thinking about doing surgery, but also for that condition, like 95% of people, if we waited a year and did absolutely nothing, will get better.
Mm.
And I often tell people I'm kind of entertaining you with treatment while we see what
So that
happens.
we feel like something's happening.
I
Yeah.
mean, not exactly. Like
Mm.
the usually in the United States, I send people to an OT, a hand therapist, typically for lateral epicondylitis or physical therapy. But it does help some people, like friction massage, stretching, sometimes some ultrasound treatment in that area. Um, and like some people will get better with that. So great, we take those people out of that bucket. Some
Mhm.
people want to try the single steroid injection, although I try not to do that, or they try the PRP, and that will make people better. I think a lot of times when I educate people about that particular condition, that like if you wait a year, most people will be better. They may wait to spend money on something, but often what happens is like about 6 months in, they're like, oh, I can't stand this anymore. Let's do something
Mm.
else. And then we get the PRP. And I do usually get imaging of that just before, to make sure we're not missing anything else.
And what
Um,
about hips and knees? Like, at what point do you think I need extra help now? Are there signs? Is there a way to kind of um, like have enough self-awareness about what you know to be normal when you try to work on something? And I feel like that's a missing piece of trust yourself. If you feel like it's more than
mhm.
waiting it out or having a bit
Yeah.
of physio for a couple of months, like trust yourself to move forward.
Yeah. Well, like particularly in knees, if there's not an acute injury, but you're having like aching or stiffness or swelling. Swelling is a big red flag. There's something going on with your cartilage.
Mm.
That may be a time to go in and get checked out. Usually we do start with x-rays and look to see if there's any joint space narrowing or bone spurs, something that like shows arthritis. But I will tell you in women, actually midlife women, a lot of times the x-rays don't show much of that because they're getting this sort of early inflammatory process, like early thinning of the cartilage or early sort of like what I call like lack of resiliency of the cartilage. And so sometimes the x-ray is normal, The MRI doesn't always change treatment, but sometimes it's reassuring to see that we're not seeing anything else. But regardless, like listen to your symptoms. And then it gets back to that question about what do you do? Like if we're talking about knee
Yeah.
arthritis, we talk about all those other things. One of the not like in the United States, what we call FDA approved, indications
Mm.
for hormone therapy, specifically estradiol, is like joint pain and inflammation isn't one of the indications for it. Whereas like preventing osteoporosis and of course vasomotor symptoms, those are, but there is quite a lot of data on inflammation, joint pain being reduced with use of hormone therapy, joint pain rebounding when you stop hormone therapy. So like if I have a woman in their, you know, midlife or menopausal woman, I ask them about other things they have going on. Are they having hot flushes or night sweats, and um, are they, it's kind of associated with this increase in joint
Yeah.
pain? And
Yeah.
I send women to women's health all the time. They're just seeing generalized like multiple joints that are more painful, and for women who can use hormone therapy, I do think it helps with
Yeah.
that. In the hip, you asked about, it's not as obvious in the knee. Like in the knee, your knee can swell and it can be
Mm.
visible and it can limit your motion. In the hip, it's more like your groin kind of hurts. It might hurt when you're sitting for a while. You may have some lack of what we call internal rotation. Sometimes it actually refers to the knee. Hey, that's another thing. You could have a totally normal knee x-ray and be coming in for knee pain, but it can actually be coming from your hip. So,
Mm.
so x-rays are almost always helpful, of course, to rule out arthritis. There are other causes of hip pain. You could have femoral acetabular impingement. You could have labral tear. It could be referred from your back. Hip pain can be kind of nebulous because there are so many sources of pain
It's
in the
such a pit
area.
stop in the body, isn't it? So, yeah.
Yeah.
Mm.
Takes a lot of
Yeah.
examining and figuring out where it's actually coming from.
Mm. And then with these pains, and often it's tightness around joints that can be actually making it feel like it's the joint, but it can be muscular tightness. Do you recommend? I know you've got a few exercises in the book on foam rolling and stretching. Are these like essential to make sure we're bringing these into our week of
Well, I
activity?
think joint mobility in general, like flexibility, gets worse as we get older, and can make you more likely to get injured, or just if you don't have a range of motion, even maybe more likely to fall.
Mm.
So I think things that decline as we get older, like mobility and flexibility, agility, balance, muscle mass and strength, of course, bone density, but that can be more silent. The other things are a little bit more obvious. Yeah, those are
Yeah.
things we kind of have to work at to hold on to or maintain.
Mm, absolutely. And what are you thinking in terms of regularity if we think about agility, mobility, balance?
Hmm. Well, balance is a thing that I just think people should try to incorporate into their daily life. And there's so many times you can just stand on one leg, or
Mm.
like we have in the book that you can, while you brush your teeth, stand on one leg. You could be sauteing something and stand on one leg.
Yeah.
Um,
Create
uh,
little challenges for yourself.
yeah, like, so it doesn't have to be additive to your minutes of time in a day, but it can be something you just incorporate in your life. I like to tell people there's pretty good evidence that incorporating like some jumping or impact activity in your weekly routine a few days a week is good. You don't have to do it every day, but probably try to get it in 3 days a week. Um, and you can combine things. So, like sometimes you can do some jumping or impact activity that also includes agility.
Mm.
So, if you're going to be doing some jumping a few days a week, try to make it also some agility work, something where you're moving your feet a little faster than usual. Kind of just, you want to practice being able to respond to your external environment. You're like, not like cat or dog gets under your foot, and just being able to quickly adjust your footing and not fall
Yeah.
down,
Yeah.
basically.
It's definitely something I've worked on since getting a dog the last few years, and it's
Yes.
made a huge difference.
Now, you
Um,
should be careful that you don't let your dog pull on your arm, though, because I will tell you, like one of the number one things that women will say to me when they come in with frozen shoulders, I got a dog, and
mm,
the dog is pulling on
pulling.
my arm, like
Yeah.
they're tugging, and that would normally not be something that would make your shoulder freeze up, but like that is one of the most common things I will hear women say. Like they just notice that, and then they get this. It's like a very minor little trauma, but it can kind of create this inflammation and stiffness. So yeah, just be careful with your big dog.
Yeah, I have learnt to be very
Yeah.
careful.
You broke something when you fell? Was it your distal radius?
I broke, what
Wrist?
was it? Fifth metatarsal?
Oh, it's in your foot. Okay.
Yeah, in my
Mm.
foot. I'd never broken anything in my whole life.
Mm-hmm.
So it was really quite a shock. I was very grateful that it didn't require anything other than healing. So I just smashed it with infrared, took my supplements, beefed up the collagen, and yeah, and gave it some time. Thankfully, it was fine. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But it was just enough of a small thing to make me go, oh, okay. I think I need to get stronger, not just agile running around a tennis court, which is good for moderate load because you have to change
Mm-hmm.
directions all the time. But it's definitely not like deadlifting your body weight. Jocelyn, I feel like I could talk to you about these things for hours. Thank you for writing the book you've written. It really helps us put everything nice and neatly into here's some things I can do. Here's what I need to work on. And here's what I can do if the poop hits the fan. It feels like it's also well laid out. So I really appreciate it. And I've really loved this time exploring these things that happen to so many of us with you. Thanks for making it not so stressful.
No, well, good. I'm glad the book had that effect on you. So,
It did.
well, thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us in listening to this week's show. If you're not already subscribed or following the show on whatever platform you listened, please do that now. It helps enormously in terms of getting this show out to more people. Another way you can connect and support the work we do so that we can support you in your low tox life is join us in the Low Tox Club. You'll get access to amazing member masterclasses where we invite some of our best show guests for a live Q&A with members. You also have great shopping discounts from low tox businesses and honestly, the nicest low tox community Facebook group that exists on the internet. I do hope you join us there. It costs just the price of a coffee a month on average. Head to lowtoxlife.com, hit the Explore tab, and Low Tox Club is the first option there. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next week.